Welcome everybody to Briyah Institute's webinar series, The Future of Leadership and the Rise of the Citizen Stakeholder. It's great to have you all here at Briyah. So Briyah, for those who don't know us yet, is a benefit corporation based in the United States. Our mission is to bridge innovation, practice, and purpose to inspire leaders to change organizations and to create an impact economy. What is this impact economy that I talk about all the time? So it's pursuing financial returns alongside positive impact for people and planet. So this webinar is the third of the series of the future of leadership. And it's my pleasure and honor to welcome and to host Renard Aaron for us, for our conversation today. So Renard is a dear friend whom I had the privilege to work indirectly with in my corporate life, in many moments of my corporate life, and who is an expert in government affairs and policy, who I admire greatly. So a little bit of Renard's bio here for you. So 25 plus years working in the United States and in Latin America for major trade associations and multinationals. Renard is the founder of PolicyZone, a consultancy that helps clients prepare for a more open, digital, and unpredictable policy environment in which the citizen has become the new stakeholder. So until March 2018, Renard was the Vice President for Government Affairs in Latin America at Johnson & Johnson, also a board member at the Johnson & Johnson Brazil Foundation. He spearheaded a number of large-scale social impact projects to tackle health challenges, including initiatives on Zika virus, humanized care, and leprosy. I don't know how to pronounce this word. He is the author of the digital lobbying book, So How Connected Citizens Influence Government and Corporate Decisions. This book is coming up, should be published this month, so let's stay tuned. He lives in San Francisco now, and he's going to share great insights from his book and his amazing personal trajectory. So thank you, Renard, and it's a pleasure to have you today. So welcome.
Thank you, Adriana. A pleasure to be with you on this forum. Thank you for the invite.
So why the future of leadership? So let's just step back a little bit for our audience to understand why Briyah is so engaged in this topic. There are two definitions of leadership that I like to use very much. One is from Tal Ben-Shahar and Angus Ridgway, and they wrote a book called The Joy of Leadership. And in this book, they say that leadership is the ability to influence the thinking and activities of other people in a shared effort to achieve goals and ultimately to realize a shared vision. So I think that's very inspiring. And the other one, the other aspect of leadership that I also like to include is from Tara Swart, Kitty Kristen, and Paul Brown, who wrote the book Neuroscience for Leadership, Harnessing the Brain Gain Advantage. Leadership is the unique combination of who you are, how you think, what you do, and how you relate to other people. So I think that this is such an important topic, and now more than ever, people need to embrace their own personal leadership journeys and start from wherever they are. We live in a world that is increasingly more complex. We are living through the fourth industrial revolution, as the World Economic Forum points it. We have a global pandemic going on that just accelerated all this process towards a more digital society. And we are now seeing the need to implement even more fast the stakeholder capitalism, as some also say. So delivering results to a number of stakeholders, not just the shareholders anymore. And also, perhaps we are living a transition, just like Edie Weiner, the CEO of the Future Hunters, coined as a transition from the traditional capitalism to what she calls public capitalism. And what is that? So she says that how we spend our money, how we earn our money, how we invest our money is everybody's business, because we need more transparency in all those things. And as she says, workers' rights, workforce inclusion, environmental sustainability, public health, this is, shifting. So it has been a call for corporate social responsibility and impact social governance investing, right, or reporting, to becoming more of a fiduciary duty and social contracts expectations of those entering the free market. She also says they will be must do if enterprises want to attract talent, investor, and consumers. And this is precisely the topic of our conversation here today with Renard. So I will ask Renard to get started. So Renard, what is this citizen stakeholder? Why corporations and their leaders are increasingly under societal pressure to take a stance and proactively address issues of the public interest?
Yeah, well, thank you, Adriana. Great setting here to start the discussion on the citizen stakeholder. And I think a number of the points you mentioned in the intro pointing to that direction already. So the citizen stakeholder, I would just take a quick step back and look at this just as stakeholder and understand that the meaning of stakeholder has been changing. Let's not go all the way back, but first it was really to have, let's say, a stake in a company. So you're talking about if you had a factory, the community that surrounded the factory, the supply chain of that particular factory, those that were directly impacted by a certain company. So it was a limited view. Then it's expanded to, certainly from a government affairs and policy point of view, to include issue. So if I had an interest in the issue, so governments, NGOs, trade associations, they all had a specific interest in a particular issue. And these were the stakeholders that from a government affairs, policy, corporation, organization, we'll look at. And now we moved to a new definition of stakeholder. And you pointed, like you mentioned the word everybody, social contract. And that's when the citizen comes in. The citizen is not looking at something that interests him or impacts him, let's put it this way, directly, like the supply chain or the legislator or the media who had a duty to inform. And now you have a citizen who has a much broader values-based interest in what a company is doing. And that's why companies are suddenly being started to having to position themselves on issues, because this citizen has an interest in broader issues that impacts not only himself, but his surrounding, his community, his network. So we're talking about environment, we're talking about gun control, we're talking about racism. These are much broader issues. It's a broader interest. And it poses a huge challenge to corporations because it's not easy. I know before my stakeholder was the head of an NGO or the head of a trade association or a particular legislator. So it's easy to sit down with that particular person and have a discussion about an issue. You cannot sit down with the citizen stakeholder. So corporations in particular have a huge challenge, and we're seeing this now, and we will be talking more about this. How do you engage the citizen? How do you communicate with the citizen? And how do you make sure you share the values? And that, I think, is the biggest challenge moving forward. The citizen wants to make sure that the company shares his values. That's how you will evaluate. And you talked about the consumer. And the way I look at it, particularly from my leadership position, from the CEO position, you cannot, and I will finish here, separate the citizen from the consumer. What you're seeing is a convergence of the citizen or the person who consumed the product, who was a consumer of a product, and you have a person who consumes public policy or social issues. And those two are converging now. So the citizen will not only buy or will only buy or will prefer to buy a product from that company that shares his values and worldview.
So what you're saying is the issues have been there, but now they have reached the C-suite, right? Yes. And this is something you pointed to in your book. So can you explain to us how has this shifted from, issues were there, companies used to deal with them and from the corporate social responsibility aspect, but now CEOs are getting engaged directly, right? And issuing stances.
Yes. And I would only say now it's just becoming more obvious. As you mentioned, the issues were around, and CEOs had already been put against the wall, let's put it this way, pressured by their employees and by society to take a position. And take Charlottesville as an example, which I think was 2017, August 2017. I mean, so we're talking, 3 years ago already. If you recall, this happened, the Charlottesville protests happened on a Friday. And on Saturday, Trump positioned himself and tweeted saying that criticizing the protests overall, and there was a huge upheaval by society overall, that Trump didn't condemn specifically the right wing, the white supremacy, the neo-Nazi groups. He just condemned everybody, to the point that on Monday, the CEO of Merck, one of the pharmaceutical companies, said, I cannot stay quiet here. I cannot partake of an administration that is not able to condemn white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups. And he took the lead, the CEO, to step down from one of the manufacturing innovation councils that the White House was sponsoring.
A very prestigious place to be, right, for CEOs at that moment.
Absolutely, it's a seat at the table where huge issues like NAFTA were being discussed, and he just couldn't reconcile sitting on the table there with an administration that was not able to condemn racism. A person was actually killed, as everybody knows, in Charlottesville. So Trump did backtrack, and then specifically criticized Ku Klux Klan and those right or extreme right groups that were protesting in Charlottesville. But the CEO of Merck, sent like a little yellow light to all the CEOs that were part of those business councils that they probably would have to take a position as well. And internally, their employees, and I was at Johnson & Johnson at the time, were putting pressure at the company saying take a stance. And this is the CEO who has to take the stance, not the head of the communications department. So a lot of meetings going on within the companies until, I guess, on Tuesday, Trump backtracked again and said, no, everybody is at fault here. And that was like the signal for all the CEOs to jointly come out and say, we cannot sit at the table of, as you mentioned, highly prestigious, top-level access to the administration and discuss issues of our interest with the administration that is, cannot take a stance against racism. So it's not that new. It's been out there. 3 years is relatively new. It's just right now becomes so obvious that CEOs have to be out there telling not only what they believe in as personally, but they are the face of the company they work for. And as you mentioned, to actually hire and retain employees, they want to know what the company you work for stands for.
Yeah, just like the pandemic accelerated the process to digital society more broadly, and remote work and everything because of social distancing has been more visible now. I believe that this trend that was shaping up years ago is also becoming much more rapid, right? The impacts are even faster, right, as we go. And we see all over the news now many examples that we'll have a chance to discuss here. So what I would like to ask you now is, okay, it's reached the C-suite. It's there, and it's fast. It's happening as we speak, right? So what kind of action is required from the leaders as a result of this bottoms-up process?
I think the first one is really a change in mindset, and you pointed out perfectly. Those issues have been out there. It's just moving much faster. And if you do not recognize that those issues are moving faster, that society is super connected, and Adriana, I know that you talk a lot about systemic or complex systems. If leadership doesn't understand that issues now are not moving at the rate of 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, and that they're moving much faster, and that the logic behind it is complex systems. They're going to be caught on a left-handed. Issues will move much faster than they're prepared to react. And I think a very nice example is today in the news. I know Disney signed an agreement with Kaepernick. Nike, was at the forefront 3 years ago when they had a campaign with Kaepernick out there. And a lot of people right now are saying, well, great that Disney took this step, but that doesn't mean that Disney is really catching up here. It just means that Kaepernick has become mainstream and Disney feels safe enough to sign an agreement with Kaepernick. So unless the C-suite up there understand that things are moving much faster, it's a mindset to much faster. It's a mindset of really taking a leadership position and being at the forefront and not waiting until it's safe. Otherwise, you will be called out for being safe. I think society wants you to be much faster and be ready. I mean, what happened with George Floyd, again, if you look at complex systems, it's a tipping point. As you mentioned, Adriana, those issues were out there. It was a question of not, if, but when this would suddenly become mainstream. And so you have to have a mindset, understand that these are complex systems, that black swans are out there, that there is a tipping point. And unless you're ready, unless you're able to read society and work with society as a citizen stakeholder and be aware of them and interact with them, gain the trust of society, you will be behind the curve.
So beautiful that you mentioned the systemic approach that I love. So all of the properties of systems are in place here as you're describing. So we have the network, we are all interconnected. This is very clear now. So what happens in one side of the world really has no time and no time at all gets to the other side of the world and gets in CEOs' desks, right? We are seeing emergence come from all of this different issues surfacing and the overlap. So they are, the discussion is really decentralized, and the different players are are able to get connected to this causes from different sides. So it is more complex than ever, and the systemic approach will definitely help leaders not only visualize this, but prepare for this reality that is here to stay with us. Wonderful. So in thinking systemically, I'm going to invite one guest to also make a question, and this has to do with the topic you're just describing. So I'm going to invite Ana Paula Ferreira, who's an expert in communications. She is here with us today. Ana Paula, let's see if we can give room to her. Can we see her? Yay, Ana. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here. So please, you can ask Renard a question directly.
Yes, thank you, Adriana, for having me. Hello, Renard. Such an exciting topic to be discussing. So my thought and question is the following. This, as we're talking about, all this whole anti-racism movement, is causing major shifts in how the conversations are out there. And one of them that comes to my mind is the advertisement boycott against Facebook that started weeks ago and now includes hundreds of companies that are pulling their advertisement from the platform until it clearly issues a statement, starts policy and practices against hate speech, against racism on the platforms. And just yesterday, the CEO and the number 2 of Facebook, they had a meeting with the organizers of this boycott, who are social activists, Color of Change, the NAACP. The meeting didn't go well because they feel Facebook has not really come up with a straightforward answer or practical, policies to combat that. So my question is, do you think, Hannah, that other companies are going to go through the same process of feeling like they have not been doing enough? And in those industries that are heavily regulated, especially, how do you think the impact is going to be, the relationship between the government and the industry? Since the government holds this regulatory power over so many industries.
Yeah, I'll try to answer some of those questions. Starting with the last one on regulation, we can go back to Charlottesville and Merck as I mentioned, the CEO of Merck, was the first one to abandon one of Trump's business councils. And Trump immediately tweeted saying, don't know exactly, but I know it's great that he left. I know now he can spend more time in lowering those very high drug prices. And anybody can read between the line here that this is a clear threat. And in this case, pharma is a heavily regulated industry, and the government, there's a huge outstanding issue here in the U.S. On drug prices. So it was a very high risk position to take. Nothing materialized here, but clearly was a threat from Trump, the president, that now that he would be willing to regulate, and other companies, do you want to follow suit here? Be careful if you follow suit. So that I think is very clear. Yes, I think that's something that the companies have to weigh all the time. But as I think, again, moving to the Charlottesville example, if you, at the end of the day, they all were aware that that was a possibility, and they still decided to take their responsibility as, let's call it, social actors instead of keeping a seat at the table. So I think companies are aware of that risk, but I think more and more they're shifting to, it's more important to me to take corporate responsibility towards those issues instead of being too concerned with specific economic or potential regulatory impact. So that's regarding your question on the regulatory aspect. What was your first question? Can you?
If you think other industries are also going to be pressured by the citizen stakeholder in such a way that seems to never be enough. It's hard to catch.
I think same way that I brought an example to Adriana, which was like 3 years ago. I'm gonna go to example of like 8 years ago, and it's a name that suddenly has come back. Trayvon Martin, who was killed in Miami, just walking back from a convenience store home, using the vigilante there. Killed them using stand your ground rules, i.e. who is familiar with stand your ground law, it allows you to use lethal force in case you feel threatened by the other person. Highly unfair law, which ultimately has a huge bias towards the African American community. It has been repeatedly used, and a conservative think tank or association called ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council, was passing a number of those laws in different states and working with the NRA. So you mentioned Color of Change. They took the lead, started a petition, started a campaign targeting those companies that were supporting ALEC, and particularly because of the stand your ground rules. In the beginning, the companies just didn't want to move. Color of Change had already gathered 100,000 signatures. There's a lot of people there putting pressure on those companies. But ALEC was calling the companies one-on-one and saying, look, a lot of our members and our people who support us want you to stop supporting ALEC. And the companies were not moving. So Color of Change changed strategy and went public. One of the articles I read, it took 5 hours for Coca-Cola was the first one of the many companies that as soon as they went public and saying, look at all those people, shame on you, that they then stopped their relationship with ALEC. Best Buy, John Deere, and a number of companies dropped to the point that 2 years later, ALEC was in serious financial problems because of so many corporations that decided to leave ALEC around a racial issue 8 years ago. This is not new, and we tend to think it's new. News cycles go so fast, but the social pressure has been out there for a while. It's just becoming more and more obvious, and as Adriana said, more fast and faster. So I think here's another clear example on, yes, the citizen stakeholder has a lot of power.
Yeah, thank you. This is a wonderful. Thank you, Anna, very much for your question. Did Renard answer it accordingly, or you still have something else to ask him?
No, that's it. All good. Thank you so much for
Good.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ana
And
Paula.
that reminds me of another systemic principle, which is, again, the emergence and the fact that some issues that are not resolved kind of were not dealt with in the past, in this crisis moment that we're going through, they emerge again. And this is probably going to be coming up in different shapes and form. And the difference now, as you're saying in your book and here to us, is that the citizen has the power to also issue their opinion about it. And this may interfere in the process much faster than before.
Yeah, and you're talking about emergence. I don't know how familiar people listening to are familiar with the idea of emergence, but without going really emergence, it's really emergence talks a little bit about that the behavior of the collective cannot be explained by the individual behaviors. So, and that's why we talk about network systems. That's why change of mindset. Issues move much faster, and part of this is emergence because network systems allow ideas, behaviors to move so much faster that you suddenly have a collective behavior, which is very
Right.
different from a one-on-one interaction.
Like we say in systemic approach, the system is a whole that's bigger than the sum of the parts. So do we have Nayana? Let's see, Nayana? I still see Anna. Let's see if we can get Nayana to join us. Yay, Nayana is here.
Hello.
So Nayana is an expert in government affairs and policy as well. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Nayana. Thank you very much. Please feel free to ask Renard your question directly.
Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. Hello, everyone. Hello, Renard. So good to hear your thoughts and your insights. I've worked with both of you, and I can say with a heart full of gratitude how much I've learned from you over the last year. So I'm super happy to join this conversation. As you know, I'm particularly passionate about the health of people and the planet. And in my career in government affairs, I've moved from trade associations to big multinational companies, mainly in the industries of healthcare, agriculture, and technology. And most recently, in the last 3 years, I moved to the impact investment industry, which you probably all know is the industry in business to save the planet. So it's where individuals and institutional investors come together to invest in companies or projects that deliver not only social and environmental returns, but also financial, which brings to mind how this industry in itself has raised the bar even higher as to what companies must and governments must deliver as impact to society as a whole, and how we shift from a mindset of the idea of doing little harm to actually and intentionally leaving something better than we found it, be it the soil or the community. And that's what we call regeneration, or working towards planetary regeneration. And it's been advocated by system thinkers and regeneration activists such as David Wall. He's an author of Regenerative Cultures, actually a really good book to read. So surely we're talking about emergency, and these emergence of these new approaches to capitalism and the economy are a result of the complexity and the interconnectedness of the issues that we face globally, and especially the rise of collective consciousness, right? We talked about collective behavior and collective consciousness. So if we think about it, the first 6 months of this year, we've seen it being disrupted not only by the pandemic itself and the fear provoked by it, but also how it demonstrated inequality and racial violence and intolerance, as Anna and you well pointed out. So along the same lines, we think about other crises that have been around for a long time, as Adriana said, not only social issues that we're facing, but also the climate crisis, and how that directly impacts social justice and inequality. And if they're left unaddressed, these crises together can deepen and leave the world even more unsustainable, less equal, and more fragile. So we've seen movements around the world happening, such as the youth climate movement, that continue to agitate governments and companies under the premise that if we knew how much destruction of the environment would harm society and economy, maybe all CEOs in the world would be environmentalists. So with that picture painted in mind, I'd like to ask you if you can share with us an example of how pressure from the citizen actually made a company bring about immediate change to the way it does business. Thank you.
Thank you for setting the stage, Nayana. Pleasure to be, and I'm with you, although quite far away.
Yeah.
Yes, I think in my book, I actually talk about one example, and it particularly when you mention the interconnectedness, it's kind of a strange interconnection here, and it's actually was a campaign by Greenpeace. And they targeted Lego, and they didn't target Lego because of Lego's practices per se, but they were targeting Shell. But it was harder to get to Shell, so because Lego is a consumer company and much more susceptible to citizen pressure, they thought that's why the interconnectedness. They went after Shell, but targeting Lego. And what did they do? They did a campaign, and a highly ingenious campaign. They used one of Lego's films. They used the theme music. Everything is awesome. They changed it. If anybody wants to look at this little short video on YouTube, it's called Everything is Not Awesome. And it's a little short video, animated video that shows a bunch of Lego blocks. And then the little Shell truck, because Lego had a partnership with Shell, a very highly valuable partnership by which they would be selling Lego themed petroleum exploration little toys with a little flag, Shell flag. So the video shows a complete set of Lego, all Shell, oil platform, all in the Arctic, and that was the ultimate target, to have Shell stop exploration, oil exploration in the Arctic. At the end of the little film, I don't want to spoil it. It's a great film. You guys can watch it. But they were able, through that campaign, a YouTube campaign actually, gather 1 million signatures, and Lego actually tried to fight it. But at the end, the pressure was so big. Those 1 million signatures from all the world, that they dropped that partnership with Shell, valued at around 60 million pounds. So it was nothing negligible. And this is just one of the greatest examples how citizen pressure forced Lego to actually drop a partnership, but they were actually targeting Shell, not Lego. So it has become, our favorite word, I guess, this evening here, complex.
Beautiful.
That's
Nayana,
a great example. Yeah, thank you. No, that's such a great example. We're bound to see more and more of that, I bet. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and the fact that, like Nayana was saying when she described herself, she's passionate about health of individuals and the planet, and this is not disconnected. So the more we learn from science and have all these different opinions really at the table, but being able to attest to what is really happening in terms of facts and data and all that, but with the citizen really able to produce action, to drive action, right? This is going to be a subject that is important for all CEOs and the C-suite level people to consider. So thank you again, Nayana, very much for your question. It's a pleasure to have you with us. So we'll before we go into the Q&As, I wanted to take the temperature in the room and see how our audience is feeling. So we're going to conduct a quick poll here to ask you a question before you ask us more questions. So let's see here. Let's please, everybody, get ready to click and tell us, how are you feeling about the global pandemic crisis? Optimistic, grateful, cooperative, patient, resilient, frustrated, or fearful? So let's click on the answer you believe best describe you at this moment in time. And let's see what the answers are. All right, we have very many resilient people here. That's good. Lots of optimistic, cooperative, grateful, some frustrated, less fearful. That's good. That's good. Okay, so now let's ask another question, and that is, so how do you think you should feel in order to drive positive change? And again, the same emotions there: optimistic, grateful, cooperative, patient, resilient, frustrated, or fearful. So please click on the answer. And voila, let's see the results. All right, lots of people thinking we should feel optimistic, cooperative, resilient, and grateful, and patient. I agree, patient brings the virtues to place. Very good, very good. All right, so one last question before I turn to Renard to make some comments about our audience today. So let's see. So in order to turn this crisis into opportunity and positive change, and we all said we need to be optimistic, good. What is the good practice you believe is most important to apply? So prioritization, discipline to drive focus, courage to take risk, collaboration through networks, relaxation and mindfulness, or aligning to a higher purpose. Please vote, and we'll have the answers shortly. All right, ready to go. Let's see the results. Collaboration through networks, very nice, I love that. All right, so aligning with a higher purpose got second place, good. And courage to take risk, discipline to drive focus, and prioritization. Excellent. So Renard, that brings you back to the conversation, right? Complexity, networking, all this networked effect. That's wonderful. Any comments from the poll?
No. I mean, as earlier you mentioned on, I think on the poll, my biggest thing is I am frustrated, and not that optimistic about the short term. But, yeah.
Well, but that's, as our audience said, we need to be optimistic to drive positive change, right? So let's get that energy going. And as the impact investors say, intentions matter. So intentionality is important. So our intentions are powerful. Also, as the quantum physics say, if we are energy, right, this makes sense.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's start asking questions from the audience now. I have a question here from Gisla Abam. Gisla is also a government affairs expert from the UK, and she's asking you, did the CEOs who led the societal pressure do it due to the services and products that they sold, or it was because of corporate social responsibility, or what? She's asking if the motive and rationale is always, she's saying that the motive and rationale is always a challenge in making the case to decision makers. So what do you think?
I think it's both, actually. I don't think it's an either or. I don't think corporations, I want to make a generalization here, but a lot of them are fairly pragmatic, put it this way. And if there's issues were like obvious 8 to maybe 10 years ago, and corporations, some of them are more forward-looking, others are less, and the timing here will depend on their threshold, how important it is to them to connect or not connect. But I think ultimately it will be a decision about both. And as I mentioned to you, the way I look at it, and I think a lot of corporations look at it, is they're looking at the consumer who's buying a product, and that consumer cannot be looked at as just a consumer who buys the product. So from a marketing perspective, it's not only about looking good or looking healthy or having a trendy product. The values are matter more for that same consumer. So what your stance is on the environment, on gun violence, on racism, all that will be factored in when you buy the product. It's not either or anymore, particularly for consumer companies. It's both are coming together.
Yeah, I saw another presenter the other day in one of the many seminars and webinars we participated in. He was showing how sustainability used to be something apart from business. And now we're seeing more and more the integration. And this integration, as much as it happens, this will probably provoke what you just described. I mean, it's not either or. It's going to be integrated into the business strategy in a very, in a bigger and broader dimension, probably.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say just that the consumer is just closer than more abstract concepts such as sustainability. So that's the only difference I make, and that's why CEOs will have to pay more attention, particularly companies that deal with the consumer. It's there right now. Sustainability maybe looked at a harder to touch issue, while the consumer who will buy my product, I need to make sure that he or she continues to buy my product. It's just more, the way I look at it is just more immediate, more concrete, which we know is super important, as it's tangible.
Right. And if you admit that the consumer is one of the stakeholders, and all of this regenerative culture that you're building involves delivering this positive aspect to this stakeholder, to the consumer. So this is a way that sustainability, which is not only the green, the environmental talk, but it's the more holistic approach to all of the different stakeholders and the positive impact comes to play. We have a comment. Sorry, we have a comment here from Terry, and that just before you mention what you're going to mention, I'm going to read this to you. So achievement-based strategies are making a move to a new business model. So maybe that's what we were talking about here.
It's too open-ended. Achievement-based strategies.
That's just a comment. Don't.
Okay. Yeah.
Question, but I think it just adds to what you're just describing here.
Okay.
We have a question. Let me ask you another question here from Carolina Julia. So I would be interested in hearing what are Renard's tips on how to set up an internal team to reactively respond to social issues. Also, how to separate the reactive from the proactive responses. Should companies establish a traffic light tool to determine what issues that companies should engage on, or which ones they should avoid? It's a very pragmatic.
Very, very, very good question. Actually, I address it a little bit in the book. I think absolutely the way most companies are structured, they have, let's say, government affairs, communications, and public affairs, corporate social responsibility, then legal, marketing, they are compartmentalized. And that moving forward doesn't work. I mean, society is not compartmentalized. And if we look at those social issues, they're not policy issues anymore. So what I'm trying to say here is those issues are not issues. They impact marketing. They impact your reputation. They impact your trust. So every part in those companies has to have a look at this, and companies haven't been structured to work this way. So very difficult to create that interconnectivity. And I did a little answer here. So how you do it will really depend on the organization's culture. It could be ad hoc meetings. It could be setting up a team. It really will depend on what the company or organization's culture is and how you do it. But that doesn't detract from the fact that you point out, absolutely critical. The compartmentalized structures simply don't work. and companies that have a compartmental structures will be caught left-handed. They're not ready to address the issue when it pops up.
Yeah, it's like playing catch up, right? You're always behind. You're never, not forward looking or driving anything. You're just following, and you're just trying to catch up, right?
And even worse, you say the wrong thing just because you're not connected to society.
Right.
So unless you're connected to society, i.e. understand society, understand the citizen stakeholder, you're just going to react wrongly.
Just like what happened to CrossFit CEO the other day, right?
Completely. Yeah.
48 hour, wow, gone.
Yeah, he's selling his company. And even people, like all lives matter. I mean, this is typical of people who have not been part of the dialogue. I know they're a part of it, and then they're not poorly intentioned. They just don't know what the debate is about really. So they're not connected to society. So unless but how do you create a structure within an organization that is connected to society? That certainly is a challenge. There is not one answer. And I think the best way I can answer that is saying it really would depend on the corporate culture, on how do you do that.
And I would add, with a systemic approach to leadership, you integrate that culture with values, and you find a networked way to monitor all those different issues from different sides of the organization. If you centralize it too much on communications or whatever, risk management, whatnot, you don't allow for the emergence of the creativity and the innovative power of the collective within the company. Beautiful.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right, Adriana.
Okay, one more question here from Roberto Laub now. So my partner at the Womb Group, happy to have you here, Roberto, with us. So good afternoon, everybody. Great opportunity to be with you so far. Thank you. How do you see governments like from Brazil or the US reacting to popular pressure about relevant issues like environment and racial issues? Sometimes they just don't seem to care. So I'm an eternal optimist myself, but these so-called people representatives are driving a very specific personal agenda. So personal agenda versus the position they hold.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, Brazil and the US in this case are very similar, and both have highly polarized societies. Different history getting there, but right now it's the two very and highly polarized societies, and what you see is that. I don't fully agree that it's a personal agenda. They're talking to their base. Both Trump and Bolsonaro are, you can call them populists, and a lot of people do, but everybody has talks from a personal point of view. They're talking to their base. Agree or disagree, it's still a point of view that you may not share. However, I think what is becoming clear is that when a corporation takes a stance against global warming in favor of the Paris Treaty that Trump thought to get the United States out of it, companies are being asked to take a position in a polarized society. When Nike hired Kopernik for their campaign, they took a side. So particularly in Brazil and the United States, be it politicians or be it corporations, the CEO in this case, I think where companies and the presidents and the politicians have realized that they cannot be everything to everybody, and that they are taking sides. So we see this more obvious in politics, and that's, Roberto, what you're asking. But companies are being asked to take position. And if we, from the policy environment, we tend to think about policy position as something ephemeral. Yes, it's a policy position, and no more. Policy positions are positions as what side are you on here? Are you a leftist, i.e. pro-environment, Are you pro Kaepernick? Do you agree with him kneeling during the hymn or not? What are your values? So the world changed. And we're talking about leadership again. CEOs need to understand, which I think most of them do, but what are they going to do about it is the question. You have to take positions here. So the citizen stakeholder is asking the CEOs to take position. And I think that's the world that companies will face more and more. There is no getting back.
And the conversation, I think, is the what's really important here, because some people don't necessarily take the time to understand what's really behind the issue, right? In systemic thinking, we also say that problems are solutions. So what is this problem a solution to? Or what is it? Why did this problem emerge from a trajectory of other things that happened before? So having this, again, systemic look for zooming out and zooming in will help decision makers move around. And also another concept we talk about here at Briyah a lot is how to embrace the duality. So I know that there are sides in some conversations, but how do you see it without judgment and have a conversation that kind of meets at another level here, so that you can talk and you can find an alternative way, right, to move. And in politics, I think this is very difficult to see happen because of the campaign and the disputes. But anyway, so let's move to another question here, because we have so many good questions. I want to make sure I ask most of them. We have another one from Luisa Zeki. Thank you, Luisa, for joining us. So she's saying, in order to inspire stakeholder demands for responsible corporate action and the new generation of leaders to prioritize purpose over profit, what is top first trade-off or stop doing, and top first should start to do for CEOs in organizations?
Very good. Let me think about it. I think it's easier. The start, I think I mentioned a little bit, and it's first truly connect, not only internally but with society. You cannot engage the citizen, which means collectively the society, without being connected. It just you won't be able to create a clear communication between the CEO or the company and your customer, citizen, or stakeholder. So start doing that. Second, stop talking about it. I think a lot of what we've seen lately is companies who are well-intentioned, who put like well-intentioned statements out there, and a lot on social media saying, well, great statement, what are you doing about it? So I think CEOs, the listening part should have been done a long time ago, and CEOs and the leadership needs to start doing. So stop, if you have been listening, stop listening and start doing, which is absolutely critical. And then I think the next point is continue, which is in between the stop and start, continue doing. If there's not a continuity here, if this is not part of the culture of the company, if there's just one leader, one CEO who embraces this, and it doesn't continue, and it doesn't trickle down within a company, it's going to die. And I think companies don't have the luxury anymore for that to happen. So they need to continue acting upon the issues that are thrown in front of them, so that they can effectively engage, create trust. We haven't talked much about trust yet, but out there has been the Edelman Trust Barometer. And if whoever looks at this, we'll see how in the last 2 or 3 years, the role of the company, and in particular the role of my CEO, has changed brutally. And more trust is being placed in my CEO than in NGOs. Which particularly in countries like Brazil and the United States, going to the previous question, where there's less trust in institutions as government because you have people like Trump and Bolsonaro. So I hope I didn't take too long to answer that question, but
no, you did beautifully. And I would just add, you have to have a way, again, the systemic approach, to act from top down and bottoms up, right? And the managers and directors have to be prepared to also support the strategy of the company, you know, in both ways. So reputation, there's a question here that's good about reputation from Malu Weber. So thank you, Malu, for being with us. Her question is, what are the dimensions of reputation the stakeholders are pressuring the companies the most nowadays? Citizenship, ethics, innovation, products and services. What do you think, Renard?
Unfortunately, I would say none of the above. I think right now, particularly here in the United States, is race. I think that is the number one issue. Ethics, of course, is extremely important, and employees and consumers will look at the ethical behavior of companies to then build the trust. And so ethic is an underlying, but as issue, really, what I see, number one issue by far, right now, even more than the environment, is ethics number one. Race number one, or racism, and number two, I would put environment.
Yeah, okay, 2 more questions burning here. So Andrew Rudman, also thank you for joining us, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Yeah, so great discussions, Renard and Adriana. So what are your thoughts on how companies can or should respond if citizen stakeholder groups are advocating positions that might impact the company's business? For example, anti-vax for pharma or pro-renewable for oil companies. This seems like a different case than broad issues like racism, equality, and etc. That's a hard case.
It's very good, Andrew, question. I'm always posing the hardest to answer questions. I think, if you look at like BP, for instance, for some years, they already have changed as a green company. And that is in response, certainly, to a change in the mindset of society overall, that people are looking for green companies. And I know BP will have an entire discourse in that area. Maybe I think last year, and I don't have it on the tip of my tongue here, but some of the oil companies created a coalition to pass certain, here in the US, to pass certain legislation that would move the industry toward a more carbon-free economy. So those companies, though the bread and butter is still oil exploration, they're crazy if they're not moving to shape this debate and take concrete business action to be prepared for when there will be a huge shift to electricity or some other alternative energy. So as I mentioned earlier, the campaign by Greenpeace is just a clear example how it targets Shell and how it succeeds in getting Shell drop drilling in the Arctic or increase the cost for a company like Shell to do drilling in the Arctic. On the anti-vax, I think it's my perception here, so I'm not particularly informed how companies are reacting to that. I think it's still fairly limited here in the United States. It's clearly a public health issue. I think there's certainly a role for companies to actually be part of this debate and educate society about the importance of vaccination. There, particularly as we are in the midst of a pandemic, there's a huge, very clear and tangible, something we haven't been able to talk, Adriana, it's not really part of this here. When you have the citizen stakeholder, not only you have a complex system, but how you communicate policy changes as well. So when you communicate policy to the citizen, you have much less time to do it, no time to go into deep scientific arguments you have to touch here in the heart to create a connection with the citizen stakeholder. So right now in the midst of pandemic, I would argue would be a very good time to educate society about the importance of vaccines.
Right, and would add just one example very quickly, the one that happened here too with Dick's Sporting Goods. After the shooting in Parkland, that the CEO, Ned Stark, decided to stop selling the rifles, the one kind of gun that allegedly was used by the guy at the school shooting. And he gave away a huge amount of profit because he truly believed that if he, who had that position and could, make a difference by not selling those kinds of guns in his store, didn't do anything, who would, right? So he really stopped selling those products, and it hit him in the bottom line for sure, but that was a stance he took, and it paid off eventually later because people started regarding Dick's differently, and he got different customers to buy from him. And another example you have in your book is what happened to Delta, right? They also got hit pretty hard, right? If you want to mention that also to our audience.
Yeah, I think it may have been after the Parkland shooting as well, if I'm not mistaken. And Delta said they would stop with the discount program for NRA members. And Delta, which is based in Georgia, got immediate pushback from the Republican-controlled legislature, saying that if Delta didn't change their position, they would scrap a $40 million tax break that was being discussed in the state legislature. The CEO, and we're talking about leadership again, came out publicly saying that their values would not be for sale, and he did stick with his position. And the Republican majority in the state legislature took away, passed the bill without a tax break, i.e., it was a $40 million hit that Delta had to take because it took a stance on the shooting in Parkland. Just to mention that a year later, they were able to actually obtain that $40 million in a new legislative package. But at the time, there was clearly an unknown for Delta. So I think it's a great example of putting your mouth where your words are. I think I got it wrong here, but anyway, you guys got it.
Great. This we could go
Walk
on
the
forever,
talk.
Renard. This is amazing. Final question from Paula Biangeli here, because it talks about your feeling a little bit frustrated and not so optimistic. So she says, I believe Renard commented that he is not very optimistic about the short term. Along this line, haven't organizations perhaps concentrated their goals, objectives a bit too excessively on the short term? As some say, there might be too much short-termism going on, and by extending the time frame, organizations could in turn think and act more systemically and holistically?
Very good, Paola, and that's something I think myself all the time. So I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer. I'll give you a little bit of my thinking instead of giving you an answer. First part of my thinking is sometimes I think that as well. On the other hand, I debate with myself a lot. We take issues as gun control. We take issues like racism, and they have been out there a long time. So we perceive it as short term. Now I'm being pressured to take a position on racism just because I know X or Y died, or a video is out there that galvanizes society. And as we were talking about it, and if you go a little bit deeper into complex systems, or if you look at issues, they come and go, but they come and go. So short-termism, to some degree, is if you look at a very small part in space. If you open up your horizon and look at gun control or racism, as I mentioned, it has been going on for some time. So at the end, I don't think it's short-termism. You will be judged by society for not being ready at this particular small point in time. And again, although we tend to look at the small point in time here, you will have to open up. And if you do open up, it's not short-termism. So that's my current thinking. I love the question, great question. I haven't completely solved it in my head yet.
Thank you, Renard. We could go on and on forever, and I really appreciate this time and opportunity to be with you. It is a pleasure. Thank you, Nayana and Ana Paula, also for joining us, all of the audience for being with us. Great questions. We are very pleased to have you. Renard, I will just ask you to say your final words before we say goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. What a pleasure to be with you all here. And if anybody wants to be more part of the discussion, I have a blog. It's called Lobby Democratizado for those who speak Portuguese, although I do have in both languages, English and Portuguese. And there's a good space. I'll put some articles there for a debate. Thank you all for being part of this discussion and for the very, very good questions.
Yeah, and everybody stay tuned for Renard's book coming up this month. It's going to be awesome to read all the different examples he collected and his insights. And also, if you're interested in systemic thinking, check Briyah out. So we have this amazing course called the CEO Meet and Master. It's a fully online course. If you want to start shifting from this, traditional linear thinking to more systemic thinking, more than welcome to join us at Briyah Institute and become a part of our community. So great to have everybody. We have more details here coming up in the screen for those who are interested. And this is Briyah's website, so www.briyah.institute. It will be a pleasure to have you join us at the CEO Meet and Master online course, but also in the upcoming webinars that we're having shortly. So Renard, again, thank you very much. A pleasure to have you. Let's definitely continue this conversation offline. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.